right now this API GraphQL, right? This is
Yeah.
very much in news. So just
Yeah.
want your opinion on that. Like, what is it and how it is going to benefit the customers?
Yeah. GraphQL, I mean, when you're talking about integrations, GraphQL is kind of like the Shangri-La. Like it is, if you're talking about moving tons of data, GraphQL is like the answer
Okay.
because one of the things that GraphQL does differently than an API, an API, you query an API and it just shoves all the data down there. Whatever was in the query and whatever properties the developer set, that's what comes back. And if it was a ton of data and the property says that that's what was set back on that API, well, like that's what you get. GraphQL allows you to set the properties that you want to come back with every query that you make, which is just, I mean, duh. Like why wouldn't have we thought of that, right? Like that just becomes so obvious. Like why wouldn't I provide the properties that I want to the API? And then with that, I get a signature of the, from if I provide the signature of the API that I want to come back, then I get that data back. Like mind blown. Like that would have been amazing to have, when I was doing RESTful implementations. So GraphQL is almost like um it's almost like worst practice. In a way of I almost give it a SQL query. Almost, just almost. But it's not a SQL query. It's an API specification. It's the almost like a JSON schema that I give it. And say here's kind of what I want this to look like. And from that the API gives me all that data back based on the schema that I give it. And the reason that this benefits everybody is let's just say that I have this gigantic table, which, by the way, Now Learning has a few gigantic tables. So we're
Okay.
utilizing the GraphQL quite heavily. Um, I have a gigantic table that has, millions and millions of records in it, or has let's just say that maybe you haven't maybe you haven't normalized your data properly. And instead of returning a record that has, 150 columns in it, you only want a record that has 5 columns. You don't want the
Okay.
entire record. You only want 5 columns out of that record. So you query GraphQL to say, I want these 5 columns. Boom, that comes back real fast, because you're not going to spend time calculating, first of all of the columns out of that database and doing a read out of all of those columns in the database. You're only going to do the read out of those 5 columns, which is going to improve the speed, but then you don't have the bandwidth of all of that data coming back and traversing the wire. And then you don't have to do the calculation. You don't have to do the loops. You don't have to do any of that, like deletion or any of that messing with all that extra data that comes back. So what really happens is you have a really slim and sleek data set that comes back because you're only dealing with the data that you have to. Beyond that, let's talk about security. I mean, if I only have to deal with the data that I have to deal with, I mean, let's I don't have to worry about accidentally transmitting the wrong data anymore, like
Right.
ACLs, things like that. Like, like that's all standard procedure. We should definitely still be doing it. But if my queries are always correct, if the way that I query the data is always correct, I don't have to worry about accidentally transmitting the wrong data from the other side, right? It's always done in the correct manner. So my security actually tightens up quite a bit because I've just got that extra side kind of, I don't know, like that extra insurance policy, because I know that if I'm querying it on the other side correctly, which I should be, and I'm only feeding it on the other side correctly, then I'm only dealing with that certain data in the correct way, as opposed to the entire record, which I could accidentally leak some data. So yeah,
Okay.
it's going to be very beneficial, and it is very beneficial if you're not using GraphQL, if you're not looking into it already. It's a very, very hot topic, but it's not just a buzzword. I mean, it came out of Facebook, which, a lot of people, oh, Facebook, but the reason it came out of Facebook is because Facebook has so much data that they have to have a way of being able to pull all this data out in a way that makes sense. And so if you're struggling with too much data in your instance, or if you're struggling with how do I display this data in a proper or just an organized way, or like I'm doing, glide record lookups, which you shouldn't be doing. You should be doing glide secure record lookups anyway. Um, you need a way of filtering out some of that data that's coming back. GraphQL is going to be your answer. That's
Okay.
definitely the way to be looking at it.
We can say it is an intelligent and more advanced way to get data from a
It's
large piece of chunk.
it's the opposite. It's almost the inverse of an API, right? Where in
Okay.
API, the API tells you what you're going to get. GraphQL tells the API what I need. It's
Okay.
yeah.
Great.